Welcome to the Damn Strong podcast. I'm your host, Bree, and I'm a full-time online fitness coach, and my passion is to educate women on all things fitness. I help women just like you step into the power of knowledge and commitment to ultimately live your best and strongest life. In this podcast, we'll talk about being damn strong in our body, mind, and life. I'll be teaching you how to navigate nutrition, strength training, and mindset challenges. So get ready to take some notes because we're building a damn strong life. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Bree, and this is the Damn Strong podcast. And today I'm going to be helping you set your fitness goal timeline. Okay. I feel like a lot of us, when I say timeline and set your fitness goal timeline, probably most of you maybe are thinking, oh, okay, like the next 12 weeks, the next 3 weeks, the next, 3 months, whatever it may be. I guess I said 12 weeks and 3 months. That's the same thing, but whatever. You're thinking more short term. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. For a lot of you guys, you really need to focus on the now, the next 24 hours, maybe the next week, the next step that you're going to take. But for some of you, you could really, 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 really benefit from zooming out and honestly planning out your fitness goal timeline for the next year. If anything, if you're not going through different phases in your fitness journey right now, if you're like, hey, Bree, I have, a lot of weight that I'm trying to lose and I don't see myself going through different phases, whatever it may be. Cool. Awesome. Great. All the power to you. But I think this will also give you and help you be realistic with your goals and what's going to be happening. Because I feel like a lot of times we're like, hey, you know what? My goal is to lose weight. I want to be in a deficit until I lose XYZ weight. But the reality is, maybe you get diet fatigue in 12 weeks. Maybe the reality is that you're trying to deficit through the summer, but you're going on a trip every single other week and you didn't think about that ahead of time. And now you're burning yourself out where you could have planned a maintenance break and then come back to the deficit. So you don't necessarily need to be going through like a bulk and a deficit and maintenance, like all these different phases to plan out your like fitness goal timeline. I think if anything, it just helps to give you a realistic view of what the next year is going to look like. So, as I go through this episode could go a million different ways because everyone's life is set up a little bit different. Again, some of you guys are going through cycles. Some of you guys are thinking about a bulk. Some of you guys have never spent a meaningful time at maintenance. Some of you have been in a deficit mindset for the last however many years, right? And so all of you listening are going to have a different take or a different way that you're going to be planning out your timeline. But what I'm hoping with this episode is I can give you ideas. I can give you little golden nuggets. So that way, when you go to plan yours out, you can think about, okay, well, Bree talked about this. That's actually a good consideration. Or Bree talked about this. I should probably start to plan it out this way. Or it may give you just insight into your own journey of like, wow, that's kind of been the missing piece. So with all of that said, the first place I want to start, and I know this might feel kind of like, well, duh, Bree, but I think a lot of people don't do it. And I think it's super valuable. Start with a calendar. Get out a calendar. I don't care if you need to go to Barnes and Nobles or Amazon and order a paper calendar. If you're a pen to paper person, you can use Google Calendar. You can use the calendar on iPhone. I'll be honest, I think the iPhone one, I want you to be able to visually see things. So maybe the iPhone one isn't as great as the Google one, because Google, you can actually like see things that you've written down a little bit better. Any calendar that's going to work, whatever calendar app you have right now where you can visually see what's going on for the next 6 months is going to be what I want you to use. Okay. The reason why is that's going to help determine what you're currently doing. Maybe not what you're currently doing, but how you go about it, maybe for how long. So for example, I had a client recently, she was in a deficit. We took a little bit of a maintenance over the holidays and she's like, look, like I want to push through a maintenance phase. I want to push through a deficit and then I need to take a break. I was like, awesome. Let's create a timeline for you. I was like, I'm thinking a 12-week deficit. What are your thoughts? And she's like, yep, 12 weeks deficit sounds amazing. I was like, cool. Let's pull up your calendar. So we pulled up her calendar and we noticed that she had a trip to go see family, and she had vocalized this before in previous trips that she's had to go see family, that she does not want to track when she goes and sees families on these trips. Totally fine, totally valid. But we consider that in her timeline. And then she had another trip. I can't remember if it was like a bachelorette or like a wedding or something where she was gone for like another week chunk of time. And so as we looked at her 12-week timeline for her deficit, we're like, okay, in this 12 weeks, we have 2 weeks where you won't be tracking. You'll most likely just be maintaining your weight over these trips. Do we want to push an extra 2 weeks? So technically the timeline is 14 weeks, but you'll be in a deficit for 12. And she's like, yes, that's perfect. That way she has those expectations set up instead of, going into a family trip or going on this bachelorette or whatever that she was going on. She didn't go in there trying to be like, oh, I'm trying to be in a deficit and it's not working. It's not successful. It's like, no, we were honest with ourselves about it, right? We were honest that whenever she goes and sees family, she goes to the same back home, the same space. And she knows each time that she doesn't want to track there. We knew that from previous trips that we had. We had tried to track before. It really just wasn't something that she wanted to pursue when she was home seeing family. So we knew ahead of time, hey, this is going to be a week of maintenance, right? And so per us just looking at the next 12 weeks, we were able to adjust not only what her current goals were. I guess her goal was still fat loss, but her current goals of, hey, we're not just going to blindly do 12 weeks. We're actually going to look at the next 12 weeks, see what's going on and push it 14 weeks. And then once we decided, hey, you're going to do your deficit for 14 weeks, then we're like, okay, then we're going to go into a maintenance phase. Let's talk about how long we want to go into a maintenance phase. And typically how I like to recommend a maintenance phase is you spend a third to half the time at minimum that you were in a deficit. So if you were in a deficit for 12 weeks, I'd say at minimum, I want you at maintenance for 4 to 6 weeks. That's at minimum. You really can do longer. And you may need longer. And that's probably another thing that we're going to get into. But then next we had our maintenance planned out. So we have our maintenance planned out now. And then we're like, okay, roughly let's give you through, the summer. Like, let's look at your plans for the summer. Like, are you traveling a ton? Are you home a ton? And for her, she's home quite a bit. So we're like, okay, let's give you a 4-week break. We'll create a checkpoint at that 4 weeks. Let's see how you're feeling, chilling at maintenance. And we'll touch base on that. And then if we decide, hey, maintenance is pretty freaking awesome, let's stay here for a little bit longer, we'll stay here a little bit longer. And then we'll push through and then we'll decide, hey, let's go into deficit around this time. And then we also need to consider the holidays. Do you want to be in deficit during the holidays? There's nothing wrong with being in a deficit during the holidays. But again, going through this with her and going through this with a lot of my clients, it helps to create realistic expectations because then you get to look at your year and be like, okay, I'm in a deficit for 12 weeks and I'm chilling at maintenance for the summer and I go in a deficit for another 12 weeks and I'm going to chill during the holidays. So then instead of them expecting to lose, 50 pounds in the course of a year, they're like, hey, I'm only doing 2 intentional cuts. I don't say only. That's a big deal to go into 2 intentional cuts, but their expectations of the amount of progress they're going to make, when they're going to be, chilling at maintenance and not be in that deficit mindset, it just creates a realistic timeline for them. So I know I went into a lot of detail with her specifically, but I feel like that was important, kind of giving you just a small little sample of how I'd plan out with a client. So for you, I want you to look at the next 6 months. If you have a calendar, you probably already have this down. If you're someone who doesn't use a calendar, I want you to list anything big that's going on in the next 6 months. If you're really down for it, list it for a year, right? Any trips that you have, any long weekends with family, maybe July 4th weekend, maybe you're taking off, Friday from work and July 4th falls on a Monday. I don't know when July 4th follows. And this is for my people in the States. Just any holiday, maybe it falls on a Monday. You're like, you know what? I really would like the long weekend. I don't want to track and I'm probably going to set myself at maintenance. Like I want you to look through the next, I guess, again, if you're in a fat loss phase, at least just look through the next 3 months, if not 6 months, maybe not even 6 months. Cause you may not, again, this is where I'm like struggling as I'm talking about this. Everyone has a different amount of weight that they want to lose. Some people have 10 pounds they want to lose. Some people you're like, hey, I have 50, 100 plus pounds I'm trying to lose. Just at least look at the next, I'm just going to say 3 to 6 months. And I want you to plan out and see, okay, what are all the different activities that I have going on that could potentially affect me being in that deficit? And that will potentially help you set up a better timeline of how long you want to be in a deficit. For some of you guys, you've never dedicated time to being in a consistent deficit. You may be like, well, I don't know if I want to do 12 weeks. I don't want to, if I want to do 4 months or 5 months. I'm not sure how long I want to go for. That's the other thing too, is like giving yourself checkpoints, right? So as you're going through your calendar, you're like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to start with what Bree said. I'm going to go for a 12-week deficit. Maybe do 8 weeks. Let's start 8 weeks. I'm going to go for an 8-week deficit. And then at 8 weeks, I'm going to create a checkpoint for myself. Okay. I'm going to check in with myself, see how I'm doing, how am I feeling? Am I getting any diet fatigue? Does that mean I need to go back to maintenance? What's going on here at this 8-week checkpoint? And then from there, you can create the next 8-week plan. So I know at the beginning of this podcast episode, I was like, I would love for people to look at the whole year. But for some of you guys, it may just be like, okay, I need to create the next 3 months of a plan. And every 4 weeks, I'm going to check with myself, see how my efforts are doing and keep going forward. But for those on a larger scale where you're like, hey, you know what? Yep, I'm going to be in a deficit for 12 weeks. Look at the holidays that you have coming up. Look at the vacations you have coming up. Look at the long weekends that you have coming up and see if you want to change that timeline based on any events that are coming up and going around. And See if that changes and affects how long that you want to be in that deficit. I think another thing to be realistic about is a normal rate of fat loss is half a pound to a pound per week. And so if you're like, okay, I'm going to be in a deficit for 12 weeks, then you can realistically understand, okay, I may lose 6 to 12 pounds, somewhere in that range. And that's a successful deficit for myself. Now, we're all going to come to this point where we need to take a maintenance phase, whether you hit your goal and it's time to go to maintenance, or you get diet fatigue and you're just like, Brie, I can't be in a deficit for another week. I really just need to come back to maintenance. Plan that out too. Again, all of this can really, really change. And I'm going to struggle with this episode probably the most out of any episodes, because it's like, I told, some of you guys that, set an 8-week checkpoint. At that checkpoint, see how you're doing, go for another 8 weeks. See how you're doing at that checkpoint. Maybe don't go for another 8 weeks, go for another 2 weeks, and set up checkpoints along the way. But at some point, you're going to be going back to maintenance. And that's another thing to look at, right? It may be like, hey, you want to do a deficit for 12 weeks, but at week 8, you go on a month-long backpacking trip to Europe. Maybe we change our timeline there. Maybe, hey, we do a deficit for 8 weeks. This is a perfect spot for me to be in maintenance for a period of time. Maybe it doesn't mean an extreme as like backpacking across Europe. It could be, hey, you know what? We're going to Disney World with the kids, and then we're going to go see, my parents in Nebraska, and then the kids start school. It's like, this would be the perfect time for me to take off from being in a deficit, pause my deficit, and then go back into one. So as you can see, it's really, really helpful to zoom out and look at the timeline of your life, because that could not only change your current goals, it could change the timeline that you create for your current goals. And I think a way it could also change what your current goals are. It might be like right now, maybe a handful of you listening will be like, I want to be in a deficit. And I'm like, that's awesome. But like, if I was to look at your calendar right now, you are setting up some, there's never a best time to be in a deficit, but there are better times. And you might be picking the hardest time of the year for yourself to be in a deficit. Yeah, I'm not trying to say that like you can't travel with the kids and be in a deficit. You can't go and see your parents and be in a deficit. It's possible. But the more you're out of your routine, the more barriers that it gets harder. It's 100% possible. You can do anything you set your mind to. But also we could recognize like, okay, maybe these back-to-back trips aren't the best time for being in a deficit. And it might be you're coming up next week, you're going on these back-to-back trips, but you really want to lose body fat. Let's be realistic. It could be that you setting up this timeline for yourself makes you realize, okay, right now is not the time for me to go into deficit. Or, hey, I was really going to be at maintenance, but the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, I got nothing on my calendar. Maybe I do my deficit now and then I do maintenance after, or my bulk or whatever. So again, pulling up this timeline can, again, change your current goals of what you got now, or it affects the timeline or how long. And I think the biggest and most important one is it helps to gauge your expectations of what's going to happen. So I feel like I went on a little bit of tangent there because I was talking about maintenance, and I said, at minimum, if you're going to a maintenance phase, I would do, and this is if you're taking a maintenance phase between deficits, right? If you've like hit your weight loss goal and you're good and you don't need to lose any more weight, maintenance for the rest of your life, like that's the best life, right? But if you're like, hey, I'm going to have, periods, I'm going to be in a deficit, I need to take a maintenance break, deficit, maintenance break. Again, a third to about half the time you were in that deficit. Again, that's a general recommendation. And that's at minimum. So I would actually err on the side of too long. If you're like, hey, I really wish I was in a deficit for 12 weeks. Brie said a third to half the time, I'll do half the time. But part of you's like, that's right. If I go back into a deficit right at 6 weeks, again, that's when the kids start school. That's when they have all their pool party, back to school parties. And then we're actually going on a last minute little hoorah trip. Like you could push that to 8 weeks, push that to 12 weeks if you want to at maintenance. But all of that to say, I would err on the side of too long, because there's never a con for being at maintenance too long, but there definitely are cons for being in maintenance too short of a time. You don't give yourself that break enough to then really hit the road running when it comes to going back into a deficit. The other thing to think through when it comes to planning out your fitness goal timeline is think about the holiday time. Everyone's holidays, and I think I even did a holiday episode talking about this. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. Maybe I talked to a client about it. I'm having deja vu about it. Anyways, think about the holidays. That's something else to come in consideration. I have plenty of clients, and I've had people start with me during the holidays and been very successful in their fat loss. I've had some people come to me during the holidays and want to lose body fat. I'm like, yeah, there might be a better time to do this, right? And it just depends for some people, right? When I look at my life, the holidays for me, like when I think about like, we have the American holiday of like Thanksgiving, right? Our holiday roughly starts like November 1st, right? Because November 1st, everyone gets into the spirit. And then here in the States, we have Thanksgiving the last Thursday in November. And then it rolls right into, Christmas time and New Year's. But for me personally, like I'm not going to a company party or a friend's party or stuff every other weekend. Like for me, it's like Thanksgiving's a day, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, and maybe New Year's Day. That's like 5 days in the span of 90 days. Well, I guess really 60 days. If we count November 1st to January 1st, right? That's 60 days. 5 days, I have something unusual or family focused going on. And we could throw in there like, I work for myself, so I don't really have a company party, which now I'm rethinking that. I should throw myself my own company party. Anyways, Sage has a company party. And so it's like, okay, I could throw that in there, right? And so that's 6 days out of everything. But I mean, it's also a company party. Is that something I'm really going to prioritize? There's that whole conversation. But for some of you guys, you're like, you're right. It really is. The holidays really is only 5 days for me. If I want to be in a deficit, I could be over the holidays. For some of you, you're like, no, Brie, you're right. Like I am either at a friend's Christmas party or I have Friendsgiving. And then I have, my parents are separated. And so I go to a Thanksgiving one week, and then the next week it's my mom's Thanksgiving, and the next week's my dad's Thanksgiving, and then we have Christmas, and we do Christmases separate, and so it's 2 weeks back to back with Christmases, and we're traveling. Like that whole holiday time could be really, really busy, and so maintenance might be the perfect time for you to be at, and so planning that into your whole entire year. There is no perfect way for me to cut this for any of you guys because it's so personal and independent based on your life. But hopefully this podcast episode can help you to give you ideas. So recently, and I'll give another example of planning out. I recently was helping, I occasionally, this will be a podcast fan exclusive. I occasionally will do one-on-one 60-minute coaching calls where they're not someone that does coaching with me month after month after month. It's like, hey, you want to pick my brain, you need help with something, whatever it may be. And I do separate one-on-one, just 60-minute coaching calls. If you're someone that's interested in that, shoot me a DM. I would love to help you with that. But the reason I mention that is I recently had one, and she really, really, and this is actually where the idea for this podcast episode came in. I was like, you know what? This could really help some people. Is she was seeking guidance on like how to plan the next year for her fitness goals. She's going to get married. She has aspirations of she's currently in deficit now. She wants to continue her deficit. She foresees that she'll need to be at maintenance. She was thinking about going into a bulk and then going to a deficit again before her wedding after the bulk. And so we walked through her entire year together. When she has trips, when she has things planned, what do the holidays look like for her? What does things look like before the wedding? All that kind of stuff. And originally we actually ended up changing her plan a little bit. So her plan originally was to be in a deficit now, go to maintenance over the summer, then go into a bulk in the winter months, and then come January, go into a deficit before the wedding. But she had this reservation of, she's losing weight now. She's obviously going to gain weight in a bulk. She's going to gain not only muscle, but body fat. And would she have enough time come January 1st to lose the body fat that she wants to for the wedding? And so we had the discussion of like, it could that you do a shorter bulk. And for most of you have listened to most of my podcast episodes, I typically recommend like a 6-month bulk. It's not that you can't do a bulk for 2 months. Like if you're scared of doing a bulk and just doing it for 2 months will dip your toe in the water, awesome, do it. But I think 6 months is a good amount of time where you'll tangibly see the muscle growth. Like if you go into a bulk for 2 months, you will build muscle faster than any other way, but you may not see it super well like you would if you went into a bulk for 6 months. And so for her, we play around with the idea, okay, we'll do we do a shorter bulk so that we can make sure we have plenty of time to cut? Do we do a bulk at all? Do you just go to maintenance and maybe you do a bulk at a later time? And so me and her had this conversation and we ultimately landed on, hey, you know what? If you're at maintenance, you're still going to build muscle much faster than you're at a deficit. If building muscle, like a ton of muscle really fast is the most important thing to you, yes, I think we should definitely do the bulk. But if you're also worried about not being able to lose the body fat that you want before the wedding, or you'd like a little extra cushion time, maybe what we could do is you don't have to go into a bulk at all over the winter time. Just go to maintenance and you will build a great amount of muscle at maintenance. Again, it'll be faster in a bulk, but me and her were kind of at this point of like, we can't have our cake and eat it too. Is that the expression? Or like, we couldn't do both. You know what I mean? It was like, we either give you a little bit of extra cushion, or you could go into a shorter bulk time. And she, we were she was down for going for a shorter bulk time. But then she's like, when I do a bulk, I really would like to go for 6 months to a year. We were just in this, I keep saying it over and over. We're like in this gray area. And so ultimately I gave her the guidance of, look, you can change this. This game plan could totally change, but I think here are options, right? You finish out your deficit, you go to maintenance over the summer, you continue in maintenance over the winter holiday, maybe a little bit beforehand. You start your cut a little bit sooner if you want to. And then you have a little bit of cushion going up into your wedding. Or, you could go into a bulk at the beginning of the holiday season, end it a little bit early, have that cushion there. There's multiple ways for her to spice it. And ultimately, she's not super gonna know until she kind of gets there. That's the thing about all this planning is if there's one takeaway, well, there's multiple takeaways I want you guys to have, but one of the big takeaways I want you guys to have is your plans can always change. Just because you set yourself up to be in maintenance for 3 months, if you're feeling really good after 2, cool. You can end it after 2 months and go into a deficit. Now, I don't want you guys to get, I don't know. I think a lot of people struggle to just sit at maintenance and they feel like nothing's happening and their goals aren't being achieved if they're not actively pursuing fat loss, which is just totally false. Like, we need to start seeing like pausing and being at maintenance and having like food and enjoying all of that as like an achievement. So I don't want you guys to be like, oh, okay, like I'm just itching to be in a deficit. Like I can't wait any longer. I'm going to go for it. But if you're truly feeling really good and like you got a good break, you could change that and do that earlier. Your plans can change at any time. So basically kind of what I gave her was, here's the game plan. Here's different ways I could see it going. But ultimately, like, you're going to need to finish your cut. And when you finish your cut, maybe you decide, oh, wow, as I've leaned out, I realize I actually have a good amount of muscle that I didn't realize I had. I don't feel like I need to do a bulk. I actually probably just go maintenance and just slowly put on muscle. I don't need as much muscle as I thought I do. She was also an athlete, right? And for a lot of my athletes, you guys have a really good base of muscle. Like your starting point is a lot higher. Like, I feel like for a lot of athletes, like maybe you weightlifted when you were an athlete, maybe you didn't weightlift. You're just, again, really active, body weight, weightlifting, all that kind of stuff. You guys have a really good base of muscle that a lot of us like non-athlete people don't start out with. And so it could be for her. And I didn't know, but I was telling her, I was like, it could be that, you finish your deficit and you're like, oh, wow, I have more muscle than I realized. I don't need the bulk. Or you deficit down. You're like, okay, I've lost the body fat, but I don't have the tone that I'm looking for or the muscle. Yes, I want to go to a bulk. Or again, she could deficit down and be like, I don't have the tone that I'm looking for, but based on my timeline, a bulk doesn't make sense right now. And so I'm going to just go to maintenance for the rest of the year. Again, she could literally splice this however she wanted, but at least she had a little bit more guidance and a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess understanding. So she wasn't so lost in like where she kind of was or what could be the potential game plan. She has a few paths and she knows that these are the paths that she can take, but ultimately until she finishes this deficit and I think maintains through the summer, then when she gets to that point, she'll kind of be at that fork in the road and decide which path she wants to take before she has her wedding. Anyways, I hope that this episode was helpful for you guys. I hope it gave you some nuggets. I'll be honest, I felt really all over the place in this episode, but again, I'm trying to give like the best general advice because I know how many different timelines can be out there for people. And I just want you guys to know there's no pressure to create a timeline. If you're just like, Brie, I've got to focus on the next step in front of me, you do that. Like that is awesome. Focus on the next step, focus on the next 24 hours, focus on just the next week. But it could potentially help even if it's just the next 12 weeks, it could potentially help your expectations of your progress if you're at least zooming out a little bit and understanding, okay, what does your life look like? What's going on right now? For anything. That could be for being in a bulk, that could be for being at maintenance, that could be for being in a deficit as well. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. As always, if you're on Spotify, you can leave me a 5-star review. If you're on Apple, you can leave not only a 5-star review, but also leave an actual like written review. Feedback and, things, takeaways that you guys have from this episode are always welcome in my DMs. I love to hear about them. As always, hope you guys have a great week and I will talk to you guys in the next episode. Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Damn Strong Podcast. Show me some love by leaving a review and sharing a screenshot of this episode on your Instagram stories. Until next time, stay strong.